the economy, with jobs. We have the most people employed today that we've ever had in the history of our country. We have the best unemployment numbers that we've had in the history of our country. In some cases, 51 years, but generally in the history of our country. Companies are moving back in. Things are going well. And I said, let's have the meeting on infrastructure. We'll get that done easily. That's one of the easy ones. And instead of walking in happily into a meeting, I walk in to look at people that had just said that I was doing a cover-up. I don't do cover-ups. You people know that probably better than anybody. And I was just looking at a list of some of the things that we just did. More than 2,500 subpoenas qualified for. And I let everybody talk. I let the White House counsel speak for 30 hours. 30 hours. I have 19 special counsel lawyers, 40 FBI agents. I said, open it all up. Let them have whatever they want. Nearly 500 search warrants. Think of that, a search warrant. Did you ever see a search warrant before? Neither did I. This was over 500 search warrants. And of the 19 people that were heading up this investigation, or whatever you want to call it, with Bob Mueller, they were contributors to the Democrat Party, most of them, and to Hillary Clinton. They hated President Trump. They hated him with a passion. They went to her big party after the election that turned out to be a wake. Not a party, it was a wake. And they were very angry. These are the people that after 2 years and $40 million or $35 million, it'll end up being a lot more than that by the time all the bills are paid. This is what happened. No collusion, no obstruction, no nothing. They issued 50 orders authorizing use of pen registers. Think of that, though, 500 witnesses. And then I have Nancy Pelosi go out and say that the President of the United States engaged in a cover-up. Now, we've had a House investigation. We have Senate investigations. We have investigations like nobody's ever had before, and we did nothing wrong. They would have loved to have said we colluded. They would have loved it. These people were out to get us. The Republican Party and President Trump. They were out to get us. This was a one-sided, horrible thing. The bottom line is they said there's no collusion with Russia. You heard so much talk about phone calls that my son made to me from this meeting that was set up by GPS Fusion, it looks like, which is the other side for those that don't know. And for a year, I heard about phone calls went to a special number, unauthorized. And it would have been my son, Don, who's a good young man, who's gone through hell. And they were calls that must have been made by him before and after the meeting, 3 calls. After massive study and work, they actually found who made the calls. One was a friend of ours, a real estate developer. Great guy, most of you know him, nice guy, loves our country. And the other one was the head of NASCAR, 2 of them. So of the 3 calls that were so horrible that he had a meeting and he called me, and then he had the meeting after, and he made 2 more calls. And they were written about like this little lines, couple of lines. Nobody wanted to admit it. Even last night, we had a great election. I went there on Monday. We had an election for Fred Keller. It was a 50-50 shot, and he won in a landslide. We went and we did a rally. Hardly mentioned today, and yet if he lost, it would have been the biggest story in the country, even bigger than this witch hunt stuff that you guys keep writing about. So here's the bottom line. There was no collusion. There was no obstruction. We've been doing this since I've been president, and actually, The crime was committed on the other side. We'll see how that all turns out. I hope it turns out well, but to my way of thinking, and I know a lot of you agree with me, the crime was committed on the other side. This whole thing was a takedown attempt at the President of the United States. And honestly, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves for the way you reported so dishonestly. Not all of you, but many of you. The way you reported. So I've said from the beginning, right from the beginning, that you probably can't go down two tracks. You can go down the investigation track, and you can go down the investment track, or the track of let's get things done for the American people. I love the American people. Drug prices are coming down, first time in 51 years because of my administration, but we can get them down way lower working with the Democrats. We can solve the problem on the border in 15 minutes if the Democrats would give us a few votes. So I just wanted to let you know that I walked into the room and I told Senator Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, I want to do infrastructure. I want to do it more than you want to do it. I'd be really good at that. That's what I do. But you know what? You can't do it under these circumstances. So get these phony investigations over with. The Wall Street Journal just wrote today, just a little while ago I saw it. Mr. Mueller wasn't obstructed in any way. This is the Wall Street Journal editorial today. Mr. Mueller wasn't obstructed in any way. His copious report, copious, 434 pages. Now they want to interview all of the same people again. They want to interview Jerry Nadler, who's been an enemy of mine for many years. He fought me in New York, unsuccessfully, by the way. I've had great success against Jerry. But he was representing Manhattan, and he would fight me all the time on the West Side Railroad yards, many times, very unsuccessfully. He failed. I come to Washington, I become president, and I said, oh no, I have Jerry Nadler again? So, Wall Street Journal, Mr. Mueller wasn't obstructed in any way. His copious report was released for all to see, and there was no collusion. This is the Wall Street Journal. And there was no collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. That's it. But they want to make this a big deal. Whether or not they carry the big I word out, I can't imagine that, but they probably would because they do whatever they have to do. I'll tell you, there's a danger here. If someday a Democrat becomes president and you have a Republican House, they can impeach him for any reason, or her. Any reason. We can't allow that to happen. We can't allow it to happen. So when you look at all of the transparency, when you look at all I've done, and I will tell you, my lawyers say, you don't have to do this. You can use presidential privilege. You don't have to let your lawyers and all of your staff testify. You can use presidential privilege, sir. Would you recommend it? Well, you can be transparent or you can be tight. If you've done nothing wrong, being transparent is better. So I said, I did nothing wrong. Let's be transparent. So that's what you have, all of these things. Look at that, all of these things, 500 witnesses that I allowed to testify. It's a disgrace. So when they get everything done, I'm all set to let's get infrastructure, let's get drug prices down. In the meantime, we're doing tremendous work without them. We're doing tremendous executive orders, a lot of work. We've had a great success, most successful economy perhaps in our country's history. We've cut regulations at a level that nobody else has cut them before, the largest tax cut in the history of the country. So we're doing a lot of work. Steve, yeah.
Pelosi give you any assurances that they won't, the House won't move
This is
toward
very sad, because this meeting was set up a number of days ago at 11 o'clock. All of a sudden, I hear last night they're going to have a meeting right before this meeting to talk about the I word. The I word. Can you imagine? I don't speak to Russians about campaigns. When I went to Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, I don't say, oh, let's call Russia. Maybe they can. It's a hoax. The greatest hoax in history. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you view Congress as a co-equal branch of government, and do you respect their power of oversight?
I respect the courts. I respect Congress. I respect right here where we're standing. But what they've done is abuse. This is investigation number 4 in the same thing, probably 5. And it really started, I think, pretty much from the time we came down the escalator in Trump Tower. So I say to you that we're going to get everything done. We're doing a lot without them. Let them play their games. We're going to go down one track at a time. Let them finish up, and we'll be all set. Thank you, everybody.
Have you read the full Mueller report? Mr. President, have you read the Mueller report?
Right. The President of the United States surprising everyone, including White House staff, according to our reporters that are there on the ground, with a surprise announcement from the White House there at the podium because of what he must have seen or must have heard over the course of the last hour or so. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, addressing reporters at one point, accused the President of the United States of engaging in a cover-up. And I think we have that sound, so we'll play what Nancy Pelosi said earlier this morning so we can set up why the President of the United States felt he had to come out and address that. Let's play what Speaker Pelosi had to say.
It was a very positive meeting, a respectful sharing of ideas, and I think a very impressive presentation by our chairs. We do believe that it's important for to follow the facts. We believe that no one is above the law, including the President of the United States, and we believe that the President of the United States is engaged in a cover-up, and that was the nature of the meeting.
All right, so really explosive commentary there from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, which led the President of the United States to make a surprise appearance on the White House lawn there. Our Stephen Portnoy, who's a CBS News White House correspondent, emailed us and said that even the White House Communications Agency did not have any idea that the president wanted to address reporters. The president, for his part, when he took to the podium, said that he has been the most transparent president in American history. He went on to tout his economic success, which recent polling that has come out from CBS News and other shows that most Americans do believe the economy is doing well, and they credit President Trump to the economy doing well. And so the president essentially going on an extended rant as to why he thinks that the Congress is engaged in an abuse of power. So let us bring in White House correspondent Chip Reed. He is standing by. He witnessed this. Chip, you and others there in the White House press corps were absolutely surprised when you realized that the White House Communications Agency was setting up to have the President of the United States take to that podium.
Yes, there was an announcement over the intercom that said all press report to the Palm Room doors, which is where you go to get out here to the Rose Garden. At first we thought it was a mistake, but of course pretty quickly people started scrambling just in case, because he was supposed to be meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate. And we are told that meeting lasted no more than 5 minutes. The president said that he wanted to talk about infrastructure, but he said Nancy Pelosi had just said on the Hill, which is correct, that she believes the White House is engaged, the president is engaged in a cover-up right now. And he said, I can't have a meeting on infrastructure under those circumstances. They were also expected to talk about trade and prescription drug prices. And as you saw, he is fired up. He said a lot of the same stuff he said many times before about this being a hoax, an effort to take down the president. He said they're probably going to do the I word. He mentioned the I word, meaning impeachment, of course, many times, and he is angry. And I can tell you there was certainly no progress on infrastructure or prescription drug prices or trade or any of the other issues, immigration, any of the other things they might have talked about. And apparently what really ticked him off was Nancy Pelosi saying just a short time ago ago on Capitol Hill that the president is engaged in a cover-up. Vlad?
Chip, we're awaiting Speaker Pelosi at some point the next hour or so. She's going to take to her podium there on Capitol Hill. But I want to ask you, everybody was scrambling because there was no indication that the president was going to appear in the White House lawn.
That's
but
right.
they had enough time to put together that sign. I know you're surrounded by other White House reporters doing live hits right now, but what does a sign underneath the president's podium say?
Let me step aside and take a look. Mueller investigation by the numbers, $35+ million spent, 2,800+ subpoenas, 675 days, 500+ witnesses, 18 angry Democrats, no collusion, no obstruction. Now, I can tell you one of those statements is arguably false, and that is no obstruction, because, of course, Mueller came up with at least 10 examples of what may have been obstruction. He did not rule on whether it was obstruction or not. He did not think it was his place to do so. He basically left that decision for the American people and presumably for Congress. And that's why Congress wants to look into this, because they believe he clearly did attempt to obstruct this investigation repeatedly. The fact that he has a sign there and the fact that he was reading some of his remarks early on suggests that he had no intention of actually doing a meeting with Pelosi and Schumer, that he was going to give them a piece of his mind and then leave the room and come out here and talk to us, because that meeting was supposed to be off camera. Remember the last time they had a meeting in the Oval Office, the president ended up talking about the potential shutdown and saying that he would take the blame for the shutdown. And when it did happen, he did get a lot of the blame for it. So I'm sure people in the White House were concerned that he might walk into some kind of trap again. Well, this time he thinks he set a trap for them by immediately ending the meeting after giving them a piece of his mind and then coming out here and making his position on this idea that the Democrats, that Nancy Pelosi is saying he's engaged in a cover-up, making clear that he believes that that is just nonsense.
You know, Chip, the president, when he first came out, he said that he walked happily into the meeting that he was scheduled to participate in with Nancy Pelosi and other House leaders. And then he said he became aware that Speaker Pelosi had said on national television that the president of the United States has engaged in a cover-up. He says, quote, "I don't do cover-ups." He went on to talk about the Mueller investigation, the Mueller report, and he said, quote, "These people were out to get us. The bottom line, no collusion." He then pivoted to talk about the economy. The economy is doing well, Chip. The numbers are poll after poll shows that most Americans, Democrat and Republican, believe that President Trump at some point is responsible or can take credit for the numbers on the economy. That's what the polling shows, not what I'm saying. It's what the polls show. But the president choosing still to remain on this issue because, I guess, of the reaction from Speaker Pelosi.
Yeah, and I tell you, even without the reaction from Speaker Pelosi, he was already fired up this morning. He had a raging Twitter feed this morning about presidential harassment and how he believes that the Democrats are simply trying to get him and take him down for political reasons. But this is going to be an issue for quite some time to come. I think that's very, very clear. And this is going to go on because there's enormous pressure on Nancy Pelosi from other Democrats to engage in impeachment proceedings. She has been resisting that because she thinks in the long run it will hurt them in the 2020 elections. She would rather just focus on defeating him at the polls. But at this point, the pressure on her is enormous. We are told that it is still a minority of the Democrats who want to proceed with impeachment, but they are very vocal and they are really pushing very hard. Vlad?
Okay, Chip, and we were talking earlier about this meeting that was supposed to happen with Speaker Pelosi, and Rebecca Kaplan, our CBS News Capitol Hill producer, just sent some notes, and it dovetails with what you were saying, Chip, about the perception, at least, is the way the president wanted to portray it for this meeting. Rebecca says that according to people who were participating in that meeting, who were at the meeting, the president pouted for a few minutes before he walked away and went on to say that Nancy Pelosi said some horrible things about me. So sort of dovetails with what you were saying about walking into that meeting and having those prepared remarks ready to go and that sign.
Yeah, this was very much a photo op out here. He was preparing for this, yet he had no intention of actually having a meeting on infrastructure. The chances that they would actually reach a meeting of the minds on infrastructure are extremely slim anyway. They have dramatically different plans on infrastructure. They don't really have any plans that come together on prescription drugs or trade or immigration either. So to some degree, this was just to try to show the public that they're actually trying to work together on the issues. But if that was their purpose, it certainly failed.
All right, Chip Reed there on the White House lawn. Chip, thank you so much for scrambling and getting on air with us really quickly. I know it was a scramble. We appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, so if you're just joining us, what happened? Just moments ago, the President of the United States scrambled the White House press corps with a surprise appearance on the White House lawn there in the podium. That was what happened earlier. The President taking to that podium and saying that he was intending on having a meeting with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but then saw the remarks that she made on national television, where Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said the President of the United States was engaged in, quote, a cover-up. President, very angry about that, came out to that podium with that sign and started going through many of the things that he has tweeted about, many of the things that he has said over and over again. Bottom line, quoting the president, here's the bottom line: no collusion, no obstruction. In fact, the president went on to say, again, quoting the president of the United States, crime was committed on the other side. He says he cannot work with Democrats until they, quote, get these phony investigations over with. So let's go to Ed O'Keefe. He's standing by in our D.C. bureau. Ed, break this down for us. The president was meant to speak with these leaders on infrastructure. The president's saying that he can't work with Democrats until they get these phony investigations, he calls them, over and done with.
Right, and we should take people back. It was about 3 weeks ago when leaders Pelosi and Schumer met alone with the president and came out of a meeting saying that they had an agreement in principle to work on infrastructure spending, which is at the top of everybody's wish list in this town. And they told him, we'll come back to you in 3 weeks. You've got to have a detailed list of what you want to do and how you're going to pay for it. We've seen this before. They all get together, they have a meeting, they say we're going to work on something, and it falls apart a few weeks later. Well, this was it falling apart today. And the first signal of that came in a letter that he sent to the Democratic leaders last night. Let's listen to what they have to say.
Thanks, Ed.
Good morning, everyone. This morning, we went to the White House for a follow-up meeting with the president, follow-up to a meeting we had a few weeks ago where we agreed on a dollar figure, where we agreed on the percentage of 80-20 in terms of responsibility, and we discussed some priorities about infrastructure. It was agreed at that time that we would return today to talk about how we would cover the cost of such a proposal. Last night, in the time in between, the president was making some sounds that we questioned how serious he could be if he were saying what he was saying. And last night, he put forth a letter saying that unless we passed the U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade agreement, there was no reason for us to, we couldn't go forward with infrastructure. We didn't see those two as related, but the fact is, hopeful, optimistic, and seeing the necessity for a big infrastructure initiative for our country, we went in the spirit of bipartisanship to find common ground with the president on this. He came into the room, made a statement that he made was, I won't even characterize it, but I will say this, and what I said after he left. Thomas Jefferson, when he was president of the United States, tasked his Secretary of the Treasury, Gallatin, to put forth an infrastructure proposal for the initiative for the country. It would follow the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Louisiana Purchase. It would be about the Erie Canal, Cumberland Road, things like that to build into America. 100 years later, Teddy Roosevelt did his infrastructure big initiative, and it was called the establishment of the National Park Service, the green infrastructure of America. We had hoped that we could give this president an opportunity to have a signature infrastructure initiative to create jobs, to improve the quality of life, to to just do so much for our country on the ongoing, not only the jobs it created by building, but the commerce it would promote. And that included roads and bridges and mass transit, broadband into rural America and other underserved areas, clean water, wastewater, all of the things that have enormous needs. The American Society of Civil Engineers says it's in the trillions, the deficit we have. We're talking about a couple $1 billion. For some reason, maybe it was lack of confidence on his part, that he really couldn't match the greatness of the challenge that we have. Wasn't really respectful of the Congress and the White House working together. He just took a pass, and it just makes me wonder why he did that. In any event, I pray for the President of the United States, and I pray for the United States of America. I'm pleased to yield now to the distinguished Democratic leader of the Senate, Mr. Schumer.
Well, thank you, Speaker Pelosi, and to watch what happened in the White House would make your jaw drop. We Democrats believe in infrastructure. We believe our roads and bridges need repair. We believe that rural America, as well as inner city America, needs broadband. We believe that to bring clean, new energy around the country, we need a power grid, modernized and updated. We believe in modernizing our transportation fleet with electric cars. We believe in all these things. And so, despite signals in the previous few weeks that he might not be serious, we went forward. We came here very seriously. The president asked in his letter last night, where would Democrats spend the money on infrastructure? I was prepared to give him a 35-page plan detailing this in all the areas I mentioned and more that had the broad support of Senate and House Democrats. We are interested in doing infrastructure. It's clear the president isn't. He is looking for every excuse, whether it was let's do trade first, or whether it was he's not going to pay for any funding, or whether today that there are investigations going on. Hello? There were investigations going on 3 weeks ago when we met. And he still met with us. But now that he was forced to actually say how he'd pay for it, he had to run away. And he came up with this pre-planned excuse. And one final point, it's clear that this was not a spontaneous move on the president's part. It was planned. When we got in the room, the curtains were closed. The president, there was a place for him at the front so he could stand and attempt to tell us why he wouldn't do infrastructure. And, of course, then he went to the Rose Garden with prepared signs that had been printed up long before our meeting. We want the president to do infrastructure. We want our Congress to perform its constitutional responsibilities and create jobs, create income, create wealth for the average American. We can do both. It's clear the president doesn't want to do any of that.
I just would add this one thing, that we had a very distinguished delegation to the Congress, very powerful House and Senate. As you can see, distinguished leader on the Appropriations Committee, Senator Patty Murray, Mr. Carper, the ranking member on the Committee of Jurisdiction that oversees some of what we're talking about here, Richie Neal, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, our distinguished Democratic leader in the House, Steny Hoyer. Where's Dick Durbin? Is he this way? The Senate whip, or we call it assistant leader, whatever the title is in the Senate.
Number two.
Debbie Stabenow of Michigan, a leader on all of these issues in her committees in the Congress. Our Assistant Speaker, Mr. Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico. Our distinguished whip of the House, Democratic whip of the House, Mr. Clyburn. The chair of the, I love saying chair, the chair of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee appropriate to this discussion, Mr. DeFazio, and the top Democrat on the Finance Committee in the United States Senate, Ron Wyden. So we came with heft, with commitment, with knowledge, which hoped with a shared vision of creating this great jobs initiative for our country, and the spirit of President Eisenhower when he instituted the interstate highway system. It was important for jobs and mobility. It was a national security initiative, and it was bipartisan. Lyndon Johnson and Sam Rayburn in the House and Senate, the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, we had hoped that we could do something comparable. Unfortunately, the President isn't ready for that. Thank you all very much.
All right, you've been listening to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, along with a group of very powerful Democrats appearing there before the press. Let's go back to Ed O'Keefe, who's standing by in Washington, D.C., while we wait for our chief congressional correspondent, Nancy Cordes, to get mic'd up. Ed, you had some interesting reporting because Speaker Pelosi did not even want to characterize what happened in the meeting, but you and Rebecca Kaplan, our producers, have some nuggets from what took place. Why don't you recount them for our audience?
Basically, this was a 20-minute meeting, but only three of it really involved everyone being in the room together. Democrats are saying that they were left in a room. Leader Schumer describes it as one with the shades drawn for 15 minutes waiting for a president who was late. He came in for 3 minutes, walked in, didn't shake anyone's hands, according to a person familiar with what went on, or sit in his seat. He said he wants to work on infrastructure. He wants to work on passing the USMCA or the new NAFTA, the Farm Bill, and other things. But frankly, he said Speaker Pelosi, he couldn't believe that she had held that meeting with Democrats at 9 a.m. this morning to talk about impeachment or an impeachment inquiry. And he says, you guys have to sort this out first before we can work on these other things. This was the follow-up meeting to something that happened on May 1, 3 weeks ago, where Pelosi, Schumer, and the president met to discuss infrastructure and the possibility of launching on what everyone in Washington wants to work on, and that is a massive infrastructure spending program. The Democrats walked out there and said, great meeting. The president promises to get back to us in 3 weeks with a plan to pay for this. They went back to the Capitol, and immediately Republicans started to say, well, I don't know how you pay for it without either cutting other government programs or cutting taxes or something. And so clearly it was already dead on arrival. Last night, ahead of this meeting, the president sends a letter to Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer saying, I want to talk to you about infrastructure tomorrow, but first I want Congress to pass the USMCA, this new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. Once we get through that, then we can talk about infrastructure. That's a classic negotiating tactic done by a president and congressional leaders of another party. I have one priority, you have one priority, we have a shared priority. Let's get mine out of the way first, and then we'll work on the other one. Instead, today, he amplified it by going after them regarding the possibility of an impeachment inquiry by House Democrats. And as Chip Reed pointed out earlier while standing in the Rose Garden, the White House clearly was prepared for this because he already had the signage made up describing the cost and the size and the scope of the Mueller report. So in essence, he set up the Democrats for this. They probably knew that coming in because, frankly, they've had so many other meetings like this with him in recent months. But let there be no mistake, Vlad. While people in Washington would like to be able to work on dual tracks, legislation and congressional oversight, the president's making clear only one at a time. And this probably answers the question that many had after last fall's elections. Can Washington do both at the same time? And the answer is, at least for now, no, they can't. If anyone's expecting significant legislation of any kind to get passed in Washington, it's just not going to happen if the White House keeps this up.
Ed O'Keefe, stand by. I want to bring in Nancy Cordes. Nancy, so to Ed's point about what the president called the investigation track or the infrastructure track. He says, or the investment track. In another instance, he called it the investment track or the investigation track. The president saying not going to happen. I wonder, to the same point that now the Democratic leaders there and our reporting bears us out, that this may have been a setup by the president, given that he had prepared remarks and a prepared sign, that Nancy Pelosi, being as strategic as she is, by making those comments earlier this morning, must have known that the president was going to react to her saying so strongly that she believes that the president engaged in a cover-up. I'm wondering what you're hearing from her office.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason she had to say that this morning, just a few hours before she was set to meet with the president. There are any number of things that she could have said. Instead, nobody pushed her to say it. She was very deliberate, and this is someone who thinks a lot about her message ahead of time. So clearly, it was designed to tweak the president. And, you know, we've seen this move by the Democrats multiple times because, frankly, if the president blows off a meeting like this, if top aides blow off hearings that they're scheduled to appear at, it does play into Democrats' hands in one way, which is that they can say, look, here is an administration in disarray that can't chew gum and walk at the same time. That is actively obstructing justice. This is the Democratic argument, by failing to show up, by failing to react to congressional oversight and respect a co-equal branch of government. So this is clearly very strategic on Democrats' parts. And the reality for the White House is, and Ed touched on this, is that the chances that the White House and Democrats were ever going to agree on a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure package was always quite slim, because the devil is in the details and how you pay for it. And Republicans on Capitol Hill were always going to give the White House an earful if it didn't find some way to offset all that spending. And the ways that the White House would want to offset that spending probably would not sit well with Democrats. So when the president blew up this meeting today and said it's not going to happen, he's sort of serving dual purposes as well, because he basically kills an initiative that probably was going to end up getting stuck in the end anyway.
Exactly.
So Ed, go ahead, jump in, Ed.
And Nancy's exactly right. He's avoiding a fight with his own party over an issue that everyone wants to work on, which is infrastructure, because the fight he'll have with fellow Republicans is how do you pay for it? He clearly wants this. He wants highways built and bridges built and airports built. Probably in the back of his mind, he's hoping that his name is on one of them one day.
Well,
but he can't get Republicans to agree to pay for it. And another sign that they're not serious about this at the White House, not for nothing, is the legislative affairs director quit this week. The person who's responsible for actually sitting down with congressional leaders and sorting out the details, Shakira Knight, announced just yesterday she's leaving. So they don't even have someone at the White House prepared to do this. To deal with the dirty details of putting together an infrastructure plan. So the president goes back to what he's best at doing, which is talking about the Mueller report and how he's being victimized by Democrats.
You know, Ed raises a good point, Nancy, because it was interesting to hear Nancy Pelosi using some of these historical references. She talked about Thomas Jefferson and Albert Gallatin and the Lewis and Clark expeditions. She talked about Teddy Roosevelt and his plan for our great national parks. And she said, I don't think I've ever heard her say something like this, but that she had hoped that she would be able to help President Trump achieve some level of infrastructure plan that would have his name associated with something like Thomas Jefferson and Teddy Roosevelt and LBJ and Sam Rayburn. And Chuck Schumer said he had a 35-page report of the stuff that they could work on. I didn't see that, but maybe he had it in his hand. It does sound as if they at least have an idea of what they would like to see. But as Ed points out, and as Speaker Pelosi pointed out, or maybe it was Senator Schumer, the president doesn't want to pay for it.
Right. I mean, details have always been a big problem for this White House, unless it is a real pet issue to someone like Stephen Miller, something like immigration. Often the president will come out and make these very lofty promises. Remember how he promised that they were working on a health care reform plan and then was basically forced to admit, oh, actually, never mind. It's coming in 2020 after the election. Often the nitty gritty, the hard work of actually crafting legislation and working through all the pay-fors is very difficult for this White House. And that was probably going to be the case today. The Democrats had a very detailed plan because this is something that they have been thinking and talking about for a while. And the White House was coming to the table without the same level of detail. And Speaker Pelosi has been able to get the better of the president before because she has a much better command of the details than he does. I, too, was struck, Vlad, as you pointed out, by her language in this, I can't say it's a press conference because they didn't take any questions, but this press availability, when she talked about these great men, Thomas Jefferson and the like. Clearly, the message she was trying to send is that those were great men who rose above politics when necessary, and they're dealing with someone who isn't able to set some of these smaller issues aside and do the important work that is required for the American people.
And remember, Vlad, that's not lip service. This is someone who has spoken at length and over the course of her leadership of the Democratic caucus of her respect for the institution of the presidency. Despite profound disagreements with George W. Bush back in the day, she always maintained she had profound respect for the institution. Same in this case, and she said it in interviews with us and with other outlets, that you have to respect the presidency itself. So talking about Jefferson and saying that she's praying for the president is totally consistent with her character, not something that she would just say today in a patronizing way. It speaks to her profound belief that there's got to be a way for the presidency and Congress to work together.
So, Nancy, to that and to some of the back and forth that we've seen between the Congress and now the White House, I wonder if this is a game of chicken in the sense that now President Trump has ratcheted up the tension. There are a number of Democrats, you and I spoke earlier about, that are calling to begin an impeachment inquiry, not impeachment proceedings, but an inquiry into impeachment. The president essentially saying that he can't work on investment or infrastructure unless the investigations are over. The House saying that they're going to continue to do what they call their constitutional responsibility to investigate. So now I wonder if the president has thrown it back in their court, that they say, look, we now have even more cover to go down this path, this inquiry that some members are calling for with regard to Speaker Pelosi.
Right. I mean, look, in some ways, the president is being utterly consistent. He isn't always consistent, but in this case, he said right after the 2018 midterm elections, at multiple times, including in press conferences, that Democrats have to choose, that they can either investigate him or they can work with him, but he's not going to do both. So in a way, he's just kind of returning to that principle. And the fact that he was willing to meet and talk with them about infrastructure may have been an aberration in the first place, because now he is reasserting that message that he will not work with Democrats if they are going to pursue investigations. The problem, the flaw with that logic, however, is he actually does need Democrats to push through his top agendas, things like trade, things like a budget agreement. He is going to need some Democratic cooperation, so he can't turn his back on them entirely. Yes, I do think you're absolutely right, however, that it gives Democrats broader leeway to conduct these investigations. But there is always the risk, and this is why Pelosi and other longtime Democrats who lived through the Clinton impeachment are so wary of going back there again. You know, as politicized as things are already here on the Hill, as soon as you start talking about impeachment, whether it's an inquiry or proceedings or articles of impeachment, whatever it is, that is like a hand grenade thrown into the middle of everything that is taking place on Capitol Hill. And that creates a whole new level of political tension. And so that is sort of the third rail that many Democrats, even the ones, many of them who I spoke to after this meeting this morning, said they're just not ready to go there yet, and they are still in the majority.
You know, Ed and Nancy, the other language that Nancy Pelosi uses, she said that she is praying for President Trump. And I thought that was sort of interesting, too. I know we do know that she is a strong Catholic. She is a regular attendant of church. But I thought that language was interesting, too, just because the president generally uses language that is meant to bully. And in this case, and Speaker Pelosi is known for doing the same, but in this case, she used sort of, you know, a Christian sentiment.
Right. I think that Democrats feel that they benefit from appearing to be the adult in the room and not storming off and not getting overly emotional. And so Pelosi has said that multiple times in the past. And just the other day, she said in an interview that she believes she respects the office of the presidency more than President Trump does. And make no mistake, that sort of appearing to be the reluctant leader being dragged in the direction of impeachment proceedings works for her politically, because she gets to look as if she is being very deliberate about all of this, not rushing to judgment. But at the end of the day, whether it's in a month or a year, if she does come around, if she does respond to growing calls from her caucus to pursue an inquiry or impeachment proceedings, she will then be able to say, look, I wasn't playing politics. I was holding out as long as I could. I hoped that we could avoid this, but now we can't. So, you know, there is some political benefit to Pelosi to having a very vocal minority in her caucus right now chanting impeachment, 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 and being the reluctant leader who's saying, no, I'm holding out.
Meanwhile, before we wrap this up, let's just talk briefly about something that the president kept hitting on during his remarks, and something that he's been hitting on Twitter for quite some time, the numbers on the economy. And we have some new CBS polling out on the economy that supports what he says, which is that the economy is doing well by all accounts, and that Democrats and Republicans alike do believe that he, in part, is responsible for that.
Yeah, those are interesting numbers, and his numbers have actually, his overall approval ratings have rebounded since last summer, in part because all sides of the aisles essentially are giving him credit for his performance on the economy. But you look beyond that issue, which is kind of indisputable these days, that the economy is in good shape. He's underwater when it comes to trade and immigration, which are two of his other signature issues, or at least ones that he likes to talk about a lot. And deeper in the numbers, a lot of people, I forget the percentage exactly, concerned that he has profited personally by virtue of being president, that his family continues to reap profits from the fact that he's in the White House. And that speaks to some of the justification the Democrats believe they have in continuing to pursue questions about his family's company's relationship with the government and with foreign governments and with other entities that are trying to do business with the administration. And this also speaks to another frustration, Vlad, that a lot of Republicans have, which is the economy's humming. Unemployment is at a record low. GDP growth is healthy. Why isn't he just talking every single day about that and keeping the focus on that? Having a meeting today on infrastructure or on the trade agreement instead of falling back on this discussion about the Mueller report. And again, it speaks to the fact that his White House, as Nancy said, is ill-equipped to have these kinds of conversations, and he doesn't want to have a fight with fellow Republicans over how to pay for an ambitious infrastructure plan. So, in some ways he's doing great. In other ways, there are still real problems for him, his administration, and Republicans.
This was, every time you think it can't get any more interesting, it does. And I'm so lucky that I have the two of you to take us. So we lost Ed, but we do have Nancy standing by. Nancy, I want to thank you so you can hear me. Ed, thank you.
Bye. He appreciates the compliment. I'll tell him about it.
Thanks, Nancy. We really appreciate it. Sure. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to break all this stuff down that we've been talking about over the last 40 minutes or so. Stick around. You're watching CBS News, CBSN.